I once believed corporate boardrooms were where dreams soared, not where they died. That faith shattered the day I walked into Solstice AI Solutions' executive conference room, my heels clicking confidently across polished marble, arms filled with the quarterly reports I'd spent sleepless nights perfecting. The room hummed with power. Board members in tailored suits, legal counsel checking, documents, investors dialing in from across the globe. But the moment I stepped inside, everything froze. At the head of the mahogany table stood Elena Carmichael, CEO and the polished face of our company. Beside her was Brandon Lewis, my fiancé of 18 months, the man who'd promised me forever just last Sunday over breakfast. Elena's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Brandon, will you marry me?" Gasps rippled across the room. Every eye turned to me, the forgotten variable in this carefully calculated equation. "I want to build more than this company with you," she continued, opening a velvet box between manicured fingers. "Be my partner, in business and in life." Brandon looked directly at me, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. Not guilt, not shame, just calculation. Then he turned back to her. "Yes, I will." No hesitation, no explanation. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I simply turned, walked out of the room, and took out my phone. My finger hovered over one button. Freeze contracts. One tap, and the $14.7 million artificial intelligence defense contract Elena had been dangling before the board was nullified. I pressed it. 32. Minutes later, someone knocked on my door. This is my story. "You're not listening to me, Camilla. The algorithm isn't learning fast enough." Elena's voice echoed through the lab 6 months before everything fell apart. I remember glancing up from my monitor, eyes strained from 14 straight hours of coding. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her perfect features. Elena. Carmichael, 38, with the kind of polished exterior Silicon Valley worshipped, MBA from Stanford, perfect blowout, and a signature red blazer that appeared in every tech magazine profile. "It's learning exactly as it should," I replied, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. "Ethical AI isn't about speed, it's about balanced decision-making." She sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment I'd grown used to. "The Pentagon doesn't care about ethics, Camilla. They care about results. And right now, Mechanicorp is outperforming us by 17%. Their AI would authorize a drone strike on a school if it calculated a 51% chance of hitting a target," I said quietly. "Is that what you want our legacy to be?" Elena's perfect smile tightened. "I want our legacy to be success, not moral victories nobody remembers." That was always our fundamental difference. To Elena, Solstice AI Solutions was a stepping stone to greatness. To me, it was a chance to prove that artificial intelligence could serve humanity without compromising its soul. I was the invisible genius, the woman who wrote the code while others collected the applause. I'd joined Solstice 3 years earlier, recruited by Professor James Whitaker, Elena's co-founder and my graduate school mentor. When cancer took him 18 months later, I became lead developer by default. My ethical AI framework had outperformed every military-grade prototype on the market while maintaining humanitarian guardrails. But I never wanted the spotlight. I just wanted my work to matter. "We need that defense contract." "Camilla," Elena said, her voice softening as she perched on the edge of my desk, "14 million would transform everything." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to argue. "I'll work on accelerating the learning modules, but the ethical parameters stay intact." Later that night, I stumbled home to my small apartment in Austin's North Loop neighborhood. The place was a mess. Takeout containers, empty coffee cups, laundry I never had time to fold. I collapsed onto my couch, too exhausted to even make it to the bedroom. "Hey, stranger." I looked up to find Brandon standing in my kitchen doorway, smiling that smile that made everything else fade away. 6'2" with kind eyes and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight I always felt pressing down on me. "You're still here?" I mumbled, surprised. "Of course I'm still here." He crossed the room and sat beside me, pulling me against his chest. "Someone has to make sure you remember to eat." I'd met Brandon Lewis 8 months earlier at a tech conference where I was presenting research. He wasn't technical. His background was in business development, but he asked questions that showed genuine interest. He called the next day, and the day after that. Within weeks, he'd become my anchor in a storm-tossed sea. "Elena wants me to compromise the ethical framework," I whispered against his shirt. His fingers traced circles on my back. "And what do you want?" "To build something that helps people without hurting them." "Then that's what you'll do," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You're the smartest person I know, Camilla. If anyone can find a way, it's you." That night, curled against him, I felt safe, supported, loved. I had no idea I was sharing my bed with the architect of my destruction. The next morning, Brandon made breakfast while I showered. When I emerged, hair dripping, he slid a plate of eggs and toast across the counter and said, "I've been thinking about your problem with the Pentagon contract." I raised an eyebrow, mouth full of toast. "What if you demonstrated the ethical AI in a different context? Show them how it could save lives on the ground, medical evacuations, civilian protection protocols, change the narrative." I stared at him, amazed. "That's brilliant," he grinned. "I have my moments. Speaking of which," he pulled out his phone and showed me an email. "I got offered a consulting position with Tech Future Group." "Brandon, that's amazing." Tech Future was a prestigious consulting firm that specialized in tech startups. It would mean working with different companies, including Solstice sometimes. His eyes searched mine. "Would that bother you? Me being in your professional space occasionally?" I shook my head. "Of course not. I trust you." That was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, Brandon joined a strategy call with Solstice's executive team. His insights on positioning our AI for defense contracts were so impressive that Elena asked him to consult directly with our team. "It's perfect," she said. Her perfect red lips curved into a smile. "Brandon understands the business side in ways we need right now." I was proud. My brilliant, supportive partner, helping the company I poured my soul into. I never questioned why Elena suddenly included him in meetings I wasn't invited to. Never wondered why their lunch discussions ran long. Never suspected that each time I explained my technical breakthroughs to him at night, I was arming my enemies with my own innovations. I was too busy believing in him, in us, to see what was happening right before my eyes. The night he proposed, 6 months after we met, we were standing on the balcony of his downtown apartment. The Austin skyline glittered before us, and he dropped to one knee with a simple solitaire ring. "You make me want to be better," he said, voice catching. "Marry me, Camilla." I said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down my face. That night, as we celebrated, I couldn't have imagined that in exactly 1 year, he would accept another proposal. In a boardroom, with me watching as my world collapsed around me. Professor Whitaker always said you were special. Dr. Lin Chen adjusted her glasses as we sat in her university office, rain pattering against the windows. He believed your work would change everything. It was 3 months after Brandon's proposal, and I was struggling with a critical decision. The Pentagon wanted our AI to evaluate threat assessments without human oversight, a red line I wasn't willing to cross. I'd sought out Dr. Chen, James's longtime colleague, for guidance. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Elena says we'll lose the contract if I don't comply." Dr. Chen's eyes, wise beyond her 50 years, studied me carefully. "Did James ever tell you why he made you his successor?" I shook my head. She opened her desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope. "He left this with me. Said if you ever came to a crossroads, I should give it to you." With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single document, an amendment to Solstice's Articles of Incorporation, signed by James before his death. It granted me 52% ownership through silent shares, effectively making me the majority stakeholder without anyone's knowledge. He knew Elena would push for profit over principle, Dr. Chen said quietly. This was his insurance policy. I stared at the paper, stunned. Why didn't he tell me? He didn't want to burden you. Said you needed to lead with your conscience, not your authority. She leaned forward. This doesn't mean you should use it lightly, Camilla. But when the time comes to protect what matters, you'll have the power to do so. I tucked the document away, mind racing. That night, I made copies and stored the original in a safety deposit box. I told no one, not even Brandon. Something in Dr. Chen's voice warned me that this knowledge was both shield and sword, to be wielded only in dire circumstances. The weeks that followed brought subtle shifts I didn't fully register. Elena began including Brandon in high-level strategy meetings about the Pentagon contract. When I asked to attend, she assured me they were just business formalities and that my time was better spent on development. Brandon's helping us navigate the bureaucracy, she explained with a dismissive wave. You focus on what you do best, the technology. I trusted her. I trusted him. I buried myself in code, perfecting our prototype for the final demonstration to the Department of Defense. Meanwhile, Brandon moved some of his things into my apartment but maintained his downtown place for late work nights. He began traveling more frequently for Tech Future assignments, sometimes, alongside Elena for coincidental solstice meetings. They texted often, professional exchanges that seemed innocent enough when he showed me his phone. The changes were so gradual that I made excuses for each one. When he canceled our weekend plans 3 times in a row, it was because the contract negotiations are at a critical stage. When I found Elena's earring in his car, he explained, "We shared an Uber after the investor dinner you couldn't attend." I believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. I loved him. He loved me. It was that simple. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office to find the lab buzzing with excitement. "We did it!" Marcus Webb, Elena's assistant, grinned as I entered. The Pentagon just scheduled the final signing ceremony for next Friday. $14.7 million. I frowned, confused. "But we haven't completed the final demonstration yet." Marcus's smile faltered. "Oh, I thought you knew." Ms. Carmichael and Brandon presented the prototype yesterday. The generals were impressed enough to fast-track approval. My stomach dropped. They presented my work without me? Technical details aren't necessary at that stage. Came Elena's voice from behind me. She stood in the doorway, immaculate as always. It was just formalities. The contract's being drafted as we speak. That evening, I opened my laptop and reviewed the presentation they'd given. The slides were polished, professional, but the technical specifications made me freeze. They'd promised capabilities beyond our ethical framework, functionalities I'd explicitly designed against. Autonomous targeting, preemptive threat elimination, surveillance beyond legal boundaries. They'd rewritten my work, or worse, they'd created a shadow version that violated everything I believed in. When Brandon came home, I confronted him. "What did you present to the Pentagon?" He kissed my cheek casually. "Just what we've been working on, babe. They loved it." "Did you remove the ethical constraints?" His hesitation was brief but telling. "We adjusted some parameters to meet their expectations. It's still your framework, just optimized." "Optimized for what?" My voice rose. "Killing without questions?" "Camilla." His tone turned patronizing. "This is business. Sometimes we have to compromise to succeed." "Not on this," I said firmly. "I won't let Solstice become a merchant of death." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's already done. We're celebrating at the signing ceremony next Friday. Elena's throwing a gala afterward. She wants you to present the quarterly projections to the board beforehand." I stared at him, something cold settling in my chest. "You and Elena seem to have everything figured out." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're just doing what's best for the company, for all of us." That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. For the first time, I wondered if I really knew the man sleeping next to me. And for the first time, I considered what power I truly held in my hands, the silent shares that made me Solstice's true owner. I didn't know then that in 9 days I would walk into a boardroom with quarterly reports and witness my fiancé accept another woman's proposal. I didn't know that my world would collapse in a single moment. But somehow, deep down, the architect in me was already designing a contingency plan for when the walls came crashing down. The week before everything fell apart, I noticed the signs that should have been obvious months earlier. They were scattered, like breadcrumbs across my days, a trail leading to betrayal that I'd been too busy, too trusting, or perhaps too afraid to follow. Monday. Elena canceled our technical review meeting but kept her lunch with Brandon. Tuesday. I overheard Marcus on the phone discussing restructuring the cap table before the acquisition, a conversation that abruptly ended when he saw me. Wednesday. Brandon suggested I wear my conservative navy suit to the board meeting instead of my usual style. "First impressions matter," he said, though I'd worked with these people for years. Thursday. Elena's assistant accidentally copied me on an email about finalizing the transition plan post-contract signing. When I asked about it, I was told it was a standard procedural document. I should have connected these dots, but I was focused on a more immediate concern, the presentation I was preparing for the board. The quarterly projections looked promising, but I'd discovered something troubling in the Pentagon contract draft. The intellectual property clauses had been altered to credit the AI framework to Solstice Executive Development Team, rather than specifically naming me as the original architect. When I mentioned this to Brandon that night, he dismissed my concerns with a casual wave. "Legal jargon, Camilla, it doesn't change anything substantively." "It changes everything," I insisted. "It erases my contribution entirely." He sighed, that patronizing sigh I'd grown to hate. "This is why you're brilliant with code but not business. No one cares who wrote what algorithm. They care about results. I stared at him, suddenly seeing a stranger in familiar skin. I care. Well, you shouldn't, he replied, checking his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Anyway, I might be late tomorrow. Last-minute prep for the signing ceremony. I nodded, watching him carefully. The ceremony starts at 3 AWAV. My board presentation is at 2 AWAV. Right. He kissed my forehead absently. I'll try to make both. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of bed and opened my laptop. With growing unease, I accessed Solstice's corporate database using my developer credentials. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Elena had filed amended articles of incorporation with the state, documents that completely restructured the company's ownership. My name was nowhere to be found in the shareholder registry. According to these new records, Elena held 67% of shares, with the remaining distributed among minor investors and executive stakeholders, including a substantial allocation to Brandon Lewis. They had erased me. Not just my intellectual contribution, but my very ownership of the company I helped build. With shaking hands, I retrieved Professor Whitaker's amendment from my files. It clearly stated that I held 52% silent ownership, a fact that rendered Elena's new documents not just unethical, but illegal. She was attempting a silent coup, and Brandon was helping her. For hours, I sat in the dark, piecing together months of subtle signs. The excluded meetings, the business trips, the late nights, the growing intimacy between my fiancé and my boss. It wasn't just business. It never had been. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I made copies of everything. The original articles, the new falsified documents, the altered contract, emails discussing the transition. I stored them in 3 separate secure locations. Then I carefully restored my access to Solstice's contract administration system, the platform that required two-factor authentication from authorized signatories before any contract could be finalized. Professor Whitaker had made me a signatory years ago. Elena had apparently forgotten this detail in her rush to rewrite history. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Texas day that usually lifted my spirits. I dressed carefully in my best suit, not the navy one Brandon had suggested. I swept my hair into a sleek ponytail, applied makeup with precision, and slipped on the diamond studs my mother had given me for graduation. You look nice, Brandon commented, watching me from the doorway. Big day. Yes, I replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. It certainly is. He stepped forward, arms outstretched for our usual morning embrace, but I turned away, pretending to check my phone. I should get going. Lots of preparation. A flash of annoyance crossed his face. Everything okay? I smiled tightly. Just nervous about the presentation. I'll see you there. Wouldn't miss it, he lied smoothly. I arrived at Solstice headquarters an hour early, printed my presentation materials, and made one final adjustment to my slides, adding a small watermark to each page that read, "Developed by Camilla Bennett, Chief Architect." A small rebellion, but it felt necessary. At 1:45, I headed to the executive boardroom. The hallway buzzed with unusual energy. Staff I barely recognized hurrying about with flowers, champagne, and tech equipment. I glimpsed Elena in her office, resplendent in a designer dress rather than her usual business attire, speaking intensely with Brandon. Neither saw me pass. I took my place in the boardroom, laying out my materials as board members and investors filed in. At precisely 2:00, I began my presentation on Solstice's quarterly performance, highlighting the technological achievements that had positioned us for the Pentagon contract. Our ethical AI framework represents a fundamental shift in defense technology, I explained, clicking through detailed analytics. By maintaining humanitarian guardrails while optimizing performance, we've created something truly revolutionary. The board members nodded appreciatively, though I noticed several checking their watches. They knew something I didn't. They were waiting for something. At 2:27, the door opened. Elena entered, followed by Brandon. Both were immaculately dressed, practically glowing with anticipation. The energy in the room shifted immediately, all attention turning to them. Before we conclude, Elena announced, interrupting my financial projections, I have a special announcement. And that's when it happened. The moment that would divide my life into before and after. Elena turned to Brandon, took his hand, and dropped to one knee before the entire board. Brandon Lewis, you have transformed this company and my life. Will you marry me? Gasps rippled across the room as she presented a velvet box containing what looked like a platinum band. Every eye turned to me. The forgotten fiancé, the invisible architect, the woman whose entire personal and professional life was imploding in real time. Brandon looked directly at me. For one heartbeat, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. Then he turned back to Elena. Yes, I will. The room erupted in applause. Someone uncorked champagne. Through the fog of shock, I heard Elena's voice, bright with triumph. And with our marriage, we'll be merging our assets, including my majority stake in Solstice and Brandon's consulting firm, just in time for the Pentagon contract signing. I stood perfectly. Still, my presentation forgotten on the screen behind me. I gathered my papers with mechanical precision, tucked them into my folder, and walked out without a word. No one tried to stop me. No one followed. In the silence of my car, I took out my phone and accessed the contract administration system. With 3 taps, I froze the Pentagon contract, rendering it unsigned and unenforceable without my authorization. Then I drove to my apartment, changed into jeans and a t-shirt, and waited. It took exactly 32 minutes for my doorbell to ring. Open the door, Camilla. We need to talk. Elena's voice carried through my apartment door, tight with controlled rage. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and turned the handle. She stood in the hallway, still wearing her celebration dress, though her perfect composure had cracked. Behind her stood Brandon, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" she asked with forced politeness. I stepped aside. "You may. Brandon stays outside." "Camilla, please," he began. "You don't get to speak to me," I said quietly. "Not anymore." Elena entered alone, her heels clicking across my hardwood floor. She didn't sit when I gestured to the couch. Instead, she stood with arms crossed, CEO mode fully engaged. "What did you do?" Her voice was ice. "I protected what's mine," I replied simply. "The contract is frozen pending proper authorization." "You have no authority." "I have every authority." I retrieved a folder from my desk and handed it to her. Page 3. Professor Whitaker's amendment to the Articles of Incorporation. I own 52% of Solstice AI Solutions. I always have. The color drained from her face as she scanned the document. This can't be legal. It was filed with the state before his death, unlike your recent amendments which constitute corporate fraud. I maintained eye contact, my voice steady. "You've been selling what you don't own, Elena." She sank onto my couch, the reality of her situation dawning slowly. "The board doesn't know. They will tomorrow, along with the Department of Defense, the SEC, and everyone else you've lied to." Her perfectly manicured hand trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "What do you want?" It was the first time Elena Carmichael had ever asked me that question, what I wanted, rather than telling me what she needed from me. The power shift was palpable in the room. "I want what's fair," I said. "Your resignation, effective immediately. A board-appointed interim CEO, full restoration of my intellectual property rights, and a public acknowledgement of my ownership stake. You'll destroy everything we've built," she whispered. "No, Elena. You did that when you decided to erase me." She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible behind her eyes. "And if I refuse?" I sat down across from her, our eyes level for once. "Then I'll file criminal charges for corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Pentagon contract will be permanently voided, and Solstice will collapse under the investigation." The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentments and power struggles. Finally, she nodded once, a gesture of surrender from a woman unaccustomed to defeat. "I'll draft my resignation tonight. You'll draft it now, on my laptop, and I'll witness it." I opened my computer. "Then you'll call an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow where you'll announce it publicly." As Elena typed her resignation letter, I heard Brandon pacing in the hallway outside. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand explanations for his betrayal. But I recognized that desire for what it was, the last gasp of a love that had never been real. When Elena finished, I read the letter carefully, ensuring it contained no loopholes or vague language. It was concise and definitive, exactly what I needed. "One more thing," I said as she stood to leave. "Your personal effects need to be removed from the office by noon tomorrow. Security will supervise." Her eyes flashed with momentary anger before resignation settled in. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I learned from watching you," I replied, opening the door. Brandon stood waiting, hope flickering across his face when our eyes met. I looked through him as if he were glass. "Your belongings will be sent to your downtown apartment," I told him flatly. "Don't attempt to contact me again." "Camilla, you have to let me explain." "I don't have to do anything for you," I interrupted. "Not anymore." As they walked away, Elena's perfect posture slightly stooped, Brandon glancing back repeatedly, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound exhaustion and the first tentative stirrings of freedom. I closed the door, leaned against it, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the relationship I'd lost, but for the woman I'd been, who trusted too easily and valued herself too little. Those tears were a cleansing, washing away months of doubt and fear. When morning came, I dressed in a simple black dress and arrived at Solstice headquarters 15 minutes before the emergency board meeting. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. "Ms. Bennett, we weren't expecting you today after—" She trailed off, unsure how to reference yesterday's humiliation. "I wouldn't miss this meeting for the world, Angela," I replied with a smile that felt almost real. The boardroom was tense when I entered. Board members whispered among themselves, glancing uncertainly between Elena, who sat rigidly at the head of the table, and me. Brandon was nowhere to be seen. I took a seat directly opposite Elena and placed Professor Whitaker's amendment on the table before me, a silent declaration of war. When the chairman called the meeting to order, Elena stood. Her voice was steady, her face a mask of professional composure as she announced her immediate resignation for personal reasons. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. "Additionally," she continued, "I must correct an administrative oversight. Camilla Bennett holds majority ownership of Solstice through shares granted by the late Professor Whitaker. The company's recent filings contained inaccuracies regarding the capital structure." Murmurs rose from around the table. The chairman looked at me, bewilderment clear in his expression. "Ms. Bennett, is this accurate?" I nodded and slid the amendment across the table. "It is. Professor Whitaker granted me 52% ownership before his death, with instructions to use that authority only when necessary to protect the company's original mission." "And you believe that time is now?" he asked. "I know it is." I straightened in my chair. Solstice was founded to develop ethical AI solutions. Recent decisions have compromised that mission for short-term profit. As majority shareholder, I'm requesting the board appoint an interim CEO while we realign with our founding principles. The next 2 hours were intense. Questions about verification of the documents, discussions of legal implications, concerns about the frozen Pentagon contract. I answered each query directly, without emotion, presenting evidence of the altered intellectual property claims and the falsified ownership records. By noon, the board had verified my claims, accepted Elena's resignation, and appointed Dr. Marcus Webb as interim CEO, a choice I supported given his technical background and ethical stance. As the meeting concluded, the chairman approached me privately. "You could have taken the CEO position yourself." I shook my head. "I'm not interested in power, Mr. Rodriguez. I just want to build something meaningful. What happens to the Pentagon contract?" "We'll renegotiate terms that honor our ethical framework," I replied. "If they accept those terms, we proceed. If not, we walk away." He studied me with newfound respect. "James always said you were the heart of Solstice. I see now what he meant." As I left the building that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. The path ahead wasn't clear. There would be legal battles, restructuring challenges, and personal recovery to navigate. But for the first time in too long, I was walking my own path, not one designed by others who undervalued my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Please talk to me. I made a terrible mistake." I deleted it without responding and turned my phone off. Some betrayals don't deserve explanations. Some apologies don't deserve to be heard. And some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose. Your dignity, your principles, and the quiet power of knowing exactly who you are. The weeks following Elena's resignation unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. I moved through them with a strange detachment, as if watching myself from a distance. This new Camilla, who spoke with quiet authority in board meetings, who declined interviews with tech journalists, who changed the locks on her apartment and donated every gift Brandon had ever given her. 3 days after the boardroom confrontation, the Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story. AI ethics clash leads to leadership shakeup at defense contractor. They described it as a philosophical disagreement over AI deployment, carefully dancing around the personal betrayal at its core. Elena was quoted saying she was pursuing new opportunities, while Solstice released a statement confirming my majority ownership and the appointment of Marcus as interim CEO. Brandon tried everything. Emails, texts, flowers delivered to my office, even a handwritten letter that I returned unopened. Finally, after 2 weeks of silence, he ambushed me in the parking garage after work. Camilla, please, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, designer suit replaced by rumpled khakis and a wrinkled button-down. Some vindictive. Part of me enjoyed seeing him disheveled. You had 18 months of minutes, I replied, unlocking my car door. You wasted them all. I made a mistake. He stepped closer, that familiar cologne triggering unwanted memories. Elena manipulated me. She promised me partnership in the company if I helped her secure the Pentagon deal. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. And proposing to her in front of me? Was that part of the business arrangement too? He had the decency to flinch. I didn't know she was going to do that. She blindsided me. Yet you said yes. I panicked. I thought if I embarrassed her in front of the board. Stop. I held up my hand. Do you hear yourself? You're still calculating, still weighing outcomes. That's who you are, Brandon. You see people as stepping stones. Not you, he whispered. I loved you. No. I met his eyes steadily. You loved what I could give you. Access to Solstice, to my work, to Elena. I was convenient until something better came along. That's not true. His voice cracked. I made one terrible mistake. It wasn't one mistake. It was hundreds of small betrayals leading to one public humiliation. I got into my char. Don't contact me again, Brandon. We have nothing left to say to each other. As I drove away, I watched him standing alone in my rearview mirror, growing smaller until he disappeared entirely. I felt nothing. No anger, no heartbreak, not even satisfaction. Just an emptiness that I hoped time would eventually fill with something better. At Solstice, the transformation was already underway. Marcus proved to be an effective interim CEO, balancing technical integrity with business pragmatism. We withdrew from the Pentagon contract negotiations and instead focused on developing healthcare applications for our AI, diagnostic tools for underserved communities, predictive models for disease outbreaks, personalized treatment protocols. 6 weeks after Elena's departure, I received a surprising email from Dr. Lin Chen. Are you free for coffee tomorrow? I have something to discuss. We met at a quiet cafe near the university campus. Dr. Chen looked exactly as I remembered. Practical bob haircut, sensible clothes, eyes sharp with intelligence behind round glasses. You've been busy, she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. James would be proud. I'm not sure about that. The company almost fell apart. She smiled. Almost. But you saved it, just as he believed you would. She slid a folder across the table. Which brings me to this. Inside was a grant proposal, $3.5 million from the National Science Foundation, to develop ethical AI frameworks for humanitarian applications, with Dr. Chen as principal investigator. I need a co-investigator, she said. Someone who understands both the technical aspects and the ethical implications. Someone like you. I looked up, surprised. You want me to leave Solstice? Not necessarily. This could be a joint venture, the university and Solstice collaborating. But it would give you some distance, some perspective. She studied me carefully. You secured your company, Camilla. But have you figured out what you want? Next? The question caught me off guard. Since the confrontation, I'd been focused on survival, on rebuilding Solstice's foundations. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond the immediate crisis. I don't know, I admitted. Then this might be perfect timing. The grant starts in 3 months. Think about it. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint Austin's skyline in shades of gold and pink. Dr. Chen's question echoed in my mind. What did I want next? Solstice was stabilizing. Our pivot to healthcare AI had generated positive press and attracted new investors focused on social impact. The board had begun searching for a permanent CEO with my blessing. The company would survive without my day-to-day involvement. But the idea of stepping away terrified me. Solstice had been my identity for so long. First as the invisible architect, then as the betrayed founder, now as the quiet power behind its resurrection. Who would I be without it? The next morning, I requested a meeting with Marcus and the board chairman. I'd like to propose a new structure, I said, laying out my vision. A joint research initiative with UT Austin focused on humanitarian AI applications. Solstice would retain the commercial rights, while the university would publish the research publicly. The chairman frowned. You're talking about giving away proprietary technology. I'm talking about fulfilling our original mission, I corrected gently. Ethical AI shouldn't be locked behind corporate walls. The basic framework should benefit everyone. Marcus nodded slowly. A freemium model for AI ethics. Basic ethical frameworks open-sourced, advanced applications commercialized. It's actually brilliant from a PR perspective. The chairman still looked skeptical. And your role in this? I'd split my time. 3 days at the university, 2 at Solstice. I'd maintain my ownership stake but step back from day-to-day operations. I met his gaze steadily. It's time for new leadership here, someone who can balance ethics and business better than I can. After lengthy discussion, they agreed to a 3-month transition period. The announcement went out the following week. Solstice AI announces university partnership, leadership transition. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Camilla Bennett? A woman's voice, professionally warm. Speaking. This is Diane Russell from the New York Times. I'm writing a feature on women in AI ethics, and your name keeps coming up. Would you be willing to share your story? My immediate instinct was to decline. I'd avoided the spotlight for years, content to let others take credit for my work. But something had changed inside me, a recognition that invisibility wasn't always a virtue. I'd be happy to speak, with you, I heard myself say. But the story isn't just about me. It's about the fundamental question of who AI serves and who it should protect. The article appeared 2 weeks later, not a sensationalized account of boardroom betrayal, but a thoughtful exploration of ethical AI development and the challenges women face in tech leadership. The photo they used showed me in the university lab, surrounded by students, looking not glamorous, but purposeful. The same day it was published, I received an email from Elena. Impressive pivot. You're better at this game than I expected. I deleted it without responding. 3 months later, I stood before a lecture hall filled with graduate students, presenting the first phase of our NSF-funded research. As I explained the ethical framework underlying our healthcare AI, I caught sight of Dr. Chen in the back row, smiling with quiet approval. The algorithms we build today will make decisions that affect millions tomorrow, I told the students. Every line of code is a moral choice. Choose wisely. Afterward, a young woman approached me clutching a dog-eared copy of the Times article. Dr. Bennett, your work inspired me to switch from pure computer science to AI ethics. I was wondering if your lab is accepting research assistants next semester. I looked at her, earnest, brilliant, reminiscent of myself a decade earlier, and felt something long dormant stir within me. Purpose, connection, the future, taking shape in unexpected ways. We're always looking for people who ask the right questions, I replied. Send me your CV. That night, walking home across campus, I realized I'd gone a full day without thinking about Brandon or Elena. The wound was still there, but it had become a scar, a mark of what I'd survived rather than what I'd lost. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Dinner to celebrate your first lecture? My treat. I smiled and typed back, only if you let me buy dessert. Small joys. New beginnings. A life rebuilding. One choice at a time. Ms. Bennett, there's someone here to see you. I looked up from my computer, where I'd been reviewing grant applications for the university's AI Ethics Fellowship. My assistant, Zoe, stood in the doorway of my campus office, expression carefully neutral in that way that suggested the visitor might be unwelcome. Who is it? I asked, glancing at my calendar. I had no appointments scheduled for the afternoon. Marcus Webb, from Solstice. My stomach tightened. Though I maintained my ownership stake in Solstice, I'd had minimal contact with the company over the past 8 months. Marcus had transitioned from interim to permanent CEO, and our quarterly board meetings were cordial but distant. We existed in parallel universes that rarely intersected. Send him in. Marcus entered, looking more polished than I remembered. Tailored suit replacing his former rumpled business casual, confidence evident in his posture. The promotion had changed him, but his smile was still genuine. Camila, you look well. So do you. Congratulations on the MedTech Innovation Award. He nodded his thanks. That's actually why I'm here. He took the seat opposite my desk. The Pentagon reached out again. I stiffened. Marcus, not for weapons, he interjected quickly. For their humanitarian division, disaster response systems. They specifically requested your ethical framework as the foundation. I leaned back, processing this information. That's unexpected. Apparently, our healthcare AI's performance during the Gulf Coast hurricane caught their attention. The ability to prioritize medical evacuations while maintaining privacy protocols impressed them. He leaned forward. They're offering $22 million for a 3-year development contract. No weapons applications, no surveillance. just disaster response. And you're here because we won't do it without you. His expression was earnest. This is your framework, Camilla. Your vision. The board wants to create a joint position, Chief Ethics Officer, that would work across Solstice and your university program. We'd fund 3 additional research positions at the university, and you'd oversee the Pentagon project's ethical implementation. I studied him, searching for hidden agendas. Is this about the money? He shook his head. It's about doing something important. Something that could save thousands of lives during natural disasters. And yes, it's about acknowledging that we need your voice in the room. I promised to consider it. And after Marcus left, I sat for a long time staring out my office window at students crossing the quad. The idea of re-engaging with Solstice stirred complicated emotions. I'd found peace in my academic role, in mentoring students and publishing research without corporate pressures. Yet I missed the real-world impact of commercial applications, the ability to implement ethics at scale. That evening, I called Dr. Chen to discuss the offer. They need you more than you need them, she observed after I explained the situation. Remember that. What would you do? I asked. She chuckled. I'd negotiate terms that protect both my time and my principles, then I'd do it. Change happens from within systems, Camilla, not just by critiquing them from outside. 2 days later, I presented my counteroffer to Marcus and the board. I would accept the Chief Ethics Officer role, splitting my time between Solstice and the university, but with 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, the Pentagon contract would include explicit ethical boundaries encoded directly into the AI. Second, a portion of the contract funds would support a public interest fellowship for AI ethics researchers from underrepresented backgrounds. Third, Solstice would publish annual transparency reports detailing how our technology was being deployed. To my surprise, they accepted all 3 conditions. The Pentagon, chastened by previous AI ethics scandals, was eager to demonstrate commitment to responsible innovation. The contract was signed in a modest ceremony at the university, with none of the glamour or champagne that had accompanied previous Solstice announcements. 6 months into the project, I received an unexpected email from a name I hadn't thought about in over a year, Elena Carmichael. Congratulations on the Pentagon humanitarian contract. Ironic how things come full circle. I'm launching a new venture and would value your perspective. Coffee next week? I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete button. Eventually, curiosity won out. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between the university and downtown. Elena arrived precisely on time, looking different than I remembered. The aggressive power suits and perfect blowout were gone, replaced by more subtle elegance. But her eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, eternally assessing advantage. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the chair across from mine. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I admitted. What's this about, Elena? She took a sip of her coffee. I'm starting a new company. Ethical AI consulting for venture capital firms, helping them evaluate startups for both technical viability and ethical implementation. I raised an eyebrow. You're positioning yourself as an ethics expert? A flicker of something, perhaps genuine self-awareness, crossed her face. I'm positioning myself as someone who learned the hard way what happens when ethics are ignored. There's a market for that perspective. And you want, what? My blessing? Your expertise. She placed a sleek business proposal on the table. I'm offering you a seat on the advisory board. Quarterly meetings, equity stake, minimal time commitment. Your name would lend credibility, yes, but I genuinely value your technical judgment. I nearly laughed at the audacity. After everything? That happened. You expect me to help you? Elena met my gaze directly. I expect you to consider whether having a voice in how venture capital evaluates AI ethics might advance the principles you care about. This isn't about me, Camilla. It's about influencing how billions of dollars are invested in AI development. And Brandon? I asked, the name still strange on my tongue after so long. Is he part of this venture? A flash of genuine surprise crossed her face. Brandon? No. We didn't last long after Solstice. He's in California now, I believe, working for some mid-sized tech consultancy. I nodded, unsurprised. Brandon had always followed opportunity, and once Elena lost her power, she'd lost her appeal. I'll think about your offer, I said, though I already knew my answer would be no. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, and some partnerships weren't worth the ethical compromise, no matter how noble the stated goal. The following week brought another unexpected development. The MacArthur Foundation announced their annual Genius Grant recipients, and my name was among them. Recognized for pioneering ethical frameworks in artificial intelligence with direct humanitarian applications. The $625,000 no-strings-attached grant came with immediate media attention. Overnight, my quiet academic life transformed. Interview requests flooded in. Conference organizers who had previously overlooked my research now offered keynote slots. Publishers inquired about book possibilities. Dr. Chen found me hiding in my office, overwhelmed by the sudden visibility. "This is good." "Camilla," she said gently, "your work deserves recognition." "I never wanted to be the face of anything," I admitted. "I just wanted to build something meaningful. Sometimes meaningful things need voices to defend them." She sat across from me. "James always said you were too brilliant to remain in the shadows. He'd be thrilled to see you stepping into the light." The mention of Professor E.I. Whitaker brought unexpected tears. "I wish he could see what we've built. He knew what you would build. That's why he protected your ownership." She squeezed my hand. "Now the question is, what will you do with this platform?" The answer came to me with surprising clarity. That evening, I emailed the MacArthur Foundation with a proposal. I would use the grant to establish the Whitaker Initiative for Equitable AI, a program to identify and support young people from underrepresented communities with promising ideas for ethical AI applications. 2 weeks later, I stood before a lecture hall filled with journalists, students, and tech industry representatives to announce the initiative. As I explained our mission to democratize AI development, I caught sight of a familiar face in the back row, Brandon, older now, watching with an unreadable expression. He slipped out before I finished speaking. No confrontation, no dramatic reunion, just a silent acknowledgement of paths that had diverged irrevocably. That night, alone in my apartment, I found myself thinking not about Brandon or Elena or even the recognition that had come my way, but about the 6 brilliant students who would receive the first Whitaker Fellowships, about the algorithms they would design, the problems they would solve, the ethical frameworks they would build upon and extend beyond what I could imagine. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Proud of you today. James would be too." For the first time in a very long time, I felt something that resembled peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The wounds had healed, leaving scars that mapped a journey from betrayal to something stronger. I stood at my window, looking out at the Austin skyline glittering against the night sky, and realized that the woman who had once walked silently out of a boardroom was gone. In her place stood someone who had found her voice, and with it, the power to shape not just code, but the future itself. 2 years after the MacArthur grant, life had settled into a rhythm I never imagined possible. The Whitaker Initiative had expanded to support 12 fellows annually, creating a network of ethical AI innovators across the country. My joint position between the university and Solstice allowed me to bridge academic theory and real-world application. And my small townhouse near Zilker Park had become a true home, filled with books, plants, and the quiet contentment of a life aligned with purpose. On a crisp October morning, I was preparing for a keynote address at the International Conference on Ethical Computing when my assistant Zoe rushed into my office. "Dr. Bennett, I think you need to see this." She handed me her tablet, open to a Tech Chronicle article. Former Solstice executive indicted on corporate espionage charges. Brandon's professional headshot stared back at me from the screen. According to the article, Brandon Lewis had been arrested for attempting to sell proprietary AI algorithms to overseas competitors. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of intellectual property theft dating back years, including his time at Solstice. I sat down, heavily scanning the details. The FBI had found evidence that Brandon had been secretly copying research and selling it throughout his career. His targets weren't just companies he worked for directly, but also their partners and competitors. He had operated as a corporate mercenary, selling information to the highest bidder. "There's more," Zoe said quietly, scrolling down. They found emails between him and Elena Carmichael from 3 years ago. Apparently, she hired him specifically to extract your research. The revelation shouldn't have hurt after all this time, but it did. A dull ache where a sharp pain had once been. Not because I still cared for Brandon, but because the betrayal had been even more calculated than I'd imagined. "Are you okay?" Zoe asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes, it's just confirmation of something I already knew, I suppose." That afternoon, as I delivered my keynote on the future of accountable AI, I noticed unusual movement at the back of the auditorium. As I concluded to enthusiastic applause, a woman in a dark suit approached the stage. Dr. Bennett, Special Agent Rivera, FBI, I apologize for the interruption, but we need to speak with you regarding the Brandon Lewis case. For the next 3 hours, I sat in a hotel conference room converted to a temporary interview space, answering questions about my time with Brandon, the algorithms he had access to, and the potential damage his theft might have caused. We believe Mr. Lewis was operating as an industrial spy long before he met you, Agent Rivera explained. Your AI research was particularly valuable because of its military applications. But our ethical framework specifically limited those applications, I pointed out, which is why he worked so hard to circumvent it. She slid a document across the table. We found this on his cloud storage. It appears to be notes on how to modify your algorithms to remove the ethical constraints. I stared at the familiar handwriting, remembering nights I'd spent explaining my work to Brandon, believing he was interested in understanding me better. All along, he'd been documenting how to weaponize what I'd created. There's something else you should know, Agent Rivera said carefully. The investigation has revealed that Ms. Carmichael was not the mastermind. She was being pressured by investors with ties to defense contractors, who wanted your AI without the ethical limitations. So Elena was a pawn too? The irony wasn't lost on me. Not exactly. She was complicit, but caught between powerful interests and her own ambitions. The agent hesitated. We'll need your testimony when this goes to trial. The prospect of facing Brandon in court, of having our relationship dissected in public, made my stomach tighten. But I thought of the students I mentored, the principles I advocated, and knew I had no choice. I'll testify, I said quietly. 3 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor at my university office. Elena Carmichael stood in my doorway, looking older and more subdued than when I'd last seen her. May I come in? She asked. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curious despite myself. I assume you've heard about Brandon? She said without preamble. Yes, the FBI interviewed me. She nodded, a flush creeping up her neck. They interviewed me too. Extensively. She took a deep breath. I've been offered immunity in exchange for testimony against certain investors. Congratulations, I said dryly. I didn't come for your approval, Camilla. Her voice carried an edge of the old, Elena. I came to warn you. This goes deeper than Brandon's opportunism or my ambition. There are people who still want your AI framework without its ethical core. I studied her, trying to discern truth from manipulation. Why tell me this? Because regardless of our history, what you've built matters. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I was wrong. About you. About the company's direction. The work you're doing now, it's what Solstice should have been all along. The admission, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. Be careful, Camilla, she added, hand on the doorknob. Success makes you visible, and visibility makes you vulnerable. After she left, I sat for a long time, turning her warning over in my mind. Then I called Marcus at Solstice and Dr. Chen at the university. By evening, we had implemented enhanced security protocols for both the Whitaker Initiative and Solstice's research databases. The Tech Chronicle article and FBI investigation brought unexpected attention to the field of AI ethics. Overnight, companies that had dismissed ethical frameworks as unnecessary constraints began implementing them as safeguards against similar scandals. Conference organizers who had relegated ethics discussions to afternoon breakout sessions now featured them in morning plenaries. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse, testifying about Brandon's access to Solstice's proprietary technology. He sat at the defense table, wearing an ill-fitting suit, eyes fixed on some middle distance that allowed him to avoid meeting my gaze. Dr. Bennett, the prosecutor asked, in your expert opinion, what damage could have resulted if the defendant had successfully modified your ethical AI framework as his notes suggested? I chose my words carefully, aware of their weight. The algorithms we developed were designed to make complex decisions while preserving human dignity and autonomy. Without those constraints, the same technology could, enable unprecedented surveillance, automated discrimination, or weapon systems that remove human judgment from matters of life and death. And these ethical constraints, they were fundamental to your design? They weren't add-ons or afterthoughts. They were the foundation everything else was built upon. I finally looked directly at Brandon. To remove them wouldn't be modification. It would be perversion. His eyes met mine briefly, then dropped. In that moment, I saw not the charismatic man who had once promised to build a life with me, but a hollow shell who had never understood the true value of what he tried to steal. Brandon was eventually sentenced to 12 years for corporate espionage and related charges. Elena received immunity as promised, but was barred from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. The investors she testified against faced their own legal consequences. Their reputations and fortunes diminished. I took no pleasure in their downfall. Justice felt less like vindication and more like a somber acknowledgement of how easily principles could be compromised when power and profit were at stake. The day after the sentencing, I received a handwritten letter from Brandon. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and nearly discarded it unopened. Something, curiosity perhaps, or the need for final closure, made me break the seal. "Camilla," it began, "I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did to you, and to your work, was unforgivable. But you deserve to know why. It wasn't just greed or ambition, it was fear. Fear of being overshadowed by your brilliance. Fear of being the footnote in your story rather than writing my own. I chose the wrong path to significance, and that choice will define me now, as your integrity has defined you. I'm sorry for being too small to love someone as extraordinary as you." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, neither responding nor discarding it. Some chapters didn't need final words to be closed. That evening, I walked through Zilker Park as the sun set over Austin, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Families gathered for picnics, musicians strummed guitars, dogs chased frisbees. Ordinary moments of joy unfolding all around me. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Dinner at my place Saturday? The new cohort of Whitaker Fellows will be there. They're eager to meet you." I smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." As darkness fell, I made my way home, not to an empty apartment haunted by betrayal, but to a life filled with purpose, meaningful work, and genuine connections. The path that had led here was neither straight nor easy, but standing at this vantage point, I could see how each painful turn had ultimately guided me toward something true. Sometimes the most profound victory isn't in what you take from those who wronged you, but in what you build from the ruins they left behind. 5 years to the day after I walked out of that boardroom, I stood on a different stage, the main auditorium at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Before me sat tech CEOs, policymakers, and activists, all gathered to discuss ethical guardrails in the age of autonomous systems. "The question isn't whether AI will transform our world," I told them, my voice steady and clear in the cavernous space. "It's whether that transformation will reflect our highest values or our basest instincts. The choice belongs not just to those who write the code, but to those who fund it, regulate it, and ultimately use it." As I concluded my address, I noticed a familiar figure in the audience. Dr. Lin Chen, now silver-haired but straight-backed as ever, watching with quiet pride. Beside her sat Marcus Webb and 2 of our original Whitaker Fellows, now leaders in their own right. The journey that had brought us here was neither simple nor painless, but it had yielded fruit beyond anything I could have imagined that day, when betrayal shattered my world. The Whitaker Initiative had expanded globally, with satellite programs in Nairobi, Bangalore, and Santiago. Solstice had become the industry standard bearer for ethical AI, its humanitarian disaster response systems deployed in earthquake zones, refugee crises, and pandemic containment efforts. The Pentagon contract that once symbolized compromise now represented a model for responsible government-academic partnership. After the panel, I made my way through the crowd of well-wishers and connection seekers to where Dr. Chen waited. "James would be speechless," she said, embracing me warmly. "You've built something extraordinary." "We've built it," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." She smiled knowingly. "Have you seen the news about Mechanicorp?" I nodded. Mechanicorp, the aggressive competitor Elena had once feared, had recently declared bankruptcy following revelations that their AI systems contained critical biases that had led to discriminatory lending practices. The scandal had triggered a market-wide reassessment of AI ethics as a core business concern rather than a public relations exercise. "Poetic justice," Dr. Chen observed. "I take no pleasure in their failure," I said truthfully. "But I'm glad the industry is finally recognizing that ethics aren't optional." Later that evening, at a reception overlooking the Swiss Alps, I found a moment of solitude on a balcony. The mountains stood silent and majestic against the night sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the darkness. "Dr. Bennett?" A young woman, approached hesitantly. I'm sorry to intrude on your moment of peace, but I wanted to thank you personally. I recognized her immediately. Arya Patel, one of our first Whitaker Fellows, now the chief ethics officer at a major healthcare AI firm. You're never an intrusion, Arya. And please, after all these years, it's Camilla. She smiled, joining me at the railing. I've been thinking about something you told us during that first fellowship summer. You said that sometimes the most meaningful victories are the ones no one sees. The harmful products never launched. The biased algorithms never deployed. The surveillance systems never built. I nodded, remembering that conversation around my dining table, 12 bright minds grappling with the weight of technological responsibility. Today I prevented the release of a diagnostic algorithm that would have systematically underdiagnosed heart disease in women and people of color, Arya continued. No one will write articles about the harm that didn't happen. No awards will be given for the technology we didn't deploy. But I knew you would understand why today feels like the most important day of my career. Tears pricked at my eyes, not of sadness, but of profound fulfillment. This is exactly why we built the Whitaker Initiative. Not for recognition, but for impact. After Arya left, I remained on the balcony, reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. The pain of that boardroom betrayal had faded to a distant memory, significant not for the wound it inflicted, but for the path it ultimately revealed. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Elena Carmichael launches AI ethics compliance firm. The accompanying photo showed Elena looking older but dignified, standing before a modest office building. The article noted that her firm specialized in helping companies navigate the increasingly complex regulatory landscape around AI ethics, a landscape shaped in part by standards my work had helped establish. I felt no resentment, only a quiet acknowledgement of how our paths had diverged and occasionally reconnected. Elena had found her own form of redemption, using her hard-won knowledge to prevent others from making similar mistakes. We would never be friends, but we had reached a form of professional detente that acknowledged our shared history without being defined by it. As for Brandon, I rarely thought of him now. His release from prison was still years away, though I occasionally heard he was teaching coding to fellow inmates. The man who had once been the center of my world had become a footnote in my story, a catalyst for change rather than its defining moment. The following morning, before departing Davos, I received an unexpected message from Marcus. Board unanimously approved the Whitaker Open Source Initiative. We're releasing the core ethical framework to the public domain. It was the culmination of years of careful advocacy, convincing Solstice that their competitive advantage lay not in hoarding the ethical framework, but in building the most sophisticated applications on top of it. By open sourcing the fundamental ethical guardrails, we would allow smaller developers to build responsible AI while raising the industry standard for everyone. 3 months later, I stood in a light-filled room at the University of Texas, surrounded by students, colleagues, and friends. On the wall hung a simple plaque dedicating the newly established James Whitaker Center for Ethical Computing. Professor Whitaker believed that technology should serve humanity's best interests. I told the gathered crowd. He understood that the most powerful algorithms aren't measured by their processing speed, but by their capacity to preserve human dignity. Dr. Chen joined me at the podium, her eyes bright with unshed tears. James also believed in people, in their capacity to choose principle over expedience, community over self-interest, lasting impact over immediate gain. She looked directly at me. He would be so proud to see his faith vindicated. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home for the center's founding team. As conversations flowed around my dining table, I slipped away briefly to my study, where a single framed document hung on the wall, Professor Whitaker's amendment granting me 52% ownership of Solstice. Beside it stood a small photo of him in his office, smiling that gentle smile I still missed. Thank you, I whispered to the empty room, for seeing what I could become before I saw it myself. A knock at the door interrupted my moment of reflection. One of our newest Whitaker Fellows, a brilliant young man from Detroit who had taught himself coding while working night shifts at a warehouse, stood in the doorway. Sorry to disturb you, Dr. Bennett. Everyone's wondering if you'll join us for the toast. I smiled. Of course. As we returned to the dining room, he asked, Is it true that you once walked out of a board meeting and crashed a multi-million-dollar defense contract? I laughed. That's a simplification of a very complicated story. I'd love to hear the real version sometime. Perhaps one day, I replied, rejoining the group gathered around my table, brilliant minds united by a shared commitment to building technology that honored human values. Marcus raised his glass. To the Whitaker Center and to Camilla, who taught us all that ethical boundaries aren't limitations, but foundations. As glasses clinked and warm laughter filled the room, I felt a sense of completion. Not because the work was finished, but because, it had transcended any single person or moment. What had begun in pain and betrayal had evolved into something much larger than myself, a legacy that would continue long after any of us were gone. Later that night, after my guests had departed, I sat on my back porch overlooking the gentle slopes of Zilker Park. Fireflies danced in the summer darkness, their lights blinking like distant stars, brought close to Earth. My phone lit up with a final message of the day from Arya Patel. Just wanted to say thank you again. Not just for the fellowship, but for showing us that integrity isn't a liability. It's the most powerful force for change we possess. I smiled, thinking of the frightened, humiliated woman who had walked out of that boardroom 5 years ago, believing her world had ended. How could she have known that it was just beginning? The betrayal that was meant to diminish me had instead revealed my true strength. The partnerships that collapsed had made room for more meaningful connections. The professional setback had redirected me toward more significant impact. Sometimes the most profound victory isn't in conquering those who wronged you, but in creating something they could never imagine. A life of purpose, integrity, and quiet power that transforms not just your own story, but countless others. As the night deepened around me, I felt at peace, not because the journey had been easy, but because it had been true. Not because I had prevailed over my enemies, but because I had remained faithful to something more important than winning. In the end, the greatest triumph wasn't that I had survived betrayal, but that I had refused to let it define me. I had built something meaningful from the ruins, something that would outlast any personal hurt or professional setback. And in that realization lay the most profound truth of all. When people mistake your silence for weakness, let the truth speak louder than your pain. Because sometimes, the strongest statement is not what you say, but what you choose to build in the aftermath of what was broken.